We're clearing up the mystery behind political polling. This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs. Polling has been used to get a pulse read on what the public is thinking on just about every issue imaginable: politics, the economy, belief in God, America's favorite sports, and so on. Many people follow political polls, especially during a presidential election, but very few, including myself, until I decided to do this podcast episode, have any real idea of how modern polling is done. Today, we're going to talk to Patrick Murray, a prominent national pollster who is the director of the Polling Institute at Monmouth University. He's going to explain to us how pollsters conduct modern polling and what political polls are telling us about public opinion nationally and here in New Jersey. Welcome, Patrick. Thanks for joining us. So let's lay the groundwork by talking about how polls are conducted. I don't think most people realize how that's done.
Yeah, and it's not the easiest thing to explain because it raises credulity. How could you interview 500, 800, 1,000 people and get something that is pretty close to what millions of people think? And it comes down, the first step is sampling. And this is the way people, count fish in the ocean. They use sampling. Nobody goes out and counts everything, but there's a mathematical property that basically says if you take a random sample, and it's truly a random sample of just a small proportion of a very large population, you can get results that are within a certain margin. So that's what we call the margin of error. That's our first step. Is making sure that we have a representative sample that we pull from all the people who live in a particular state or all the voters in the country, whatever it happens to be, that is our population. We've done populations or surveys of people who, were affected, had reported storm damage from Superstorm Sandy, back 8 years ago. So there are all different types of populations. And as long as you approach it with the sampling prospect of, I'm going to get a truly, random sample and do the best job that I have to make that representative, that's your first step. Then the second step is, how do you contact them? How do you talk to them? For many years, our go-to method, and it continues still to be kind of the gold standard method, but we're moving into other methods, was by telephone. Talk to people by telephone, call them up. I remember when I started back in this business more than 25 years ago, the only thing you had was a landline. Nobody had caller ID. There was no such thing, which meant if the phone rang in your house, you generally picked it up.
I remember those. It's very
right. Remember those days? The phone rang. You said, "Well, who is this?" So let me pick it up and talk to them. So we did a really good job of getting people on the phone and getting them to talk to us. Obviously, as caller ID came in, as cell phones came in, those numbers, that participation went down. People started getting more and more annoyance calls, sales calls, and stop picking up the phone unless they recognize the number. So we, it's become harder to do because it just takes a lot more work to get somebody on the phone. But it actually, that part of the equation has not affected our accuracy. We can still get a representative sample. We just have to work harder at it to get people on the phone who are willing to talk to us. And nowadays, our samples include cell phones and landlines as well. Most of the calls we make nowadays are to cell phones. Just a few holdouts, particularly here in New Jersey, which actually has more holdouts in terms of cutting the cord than almost anywhere else in the country for whatever reason. We're still not sure why. So we still have some landlines that we have to deal with here in New Jersey because people don't have cell phones or don't use their cell phones that often. There's still a group of older folks who do that. But that's the first step. Then other methods that are rising up are online We've done a lot of online work where you take a sample, you try to match it to email number, like we take a list of registered voters and match it to email addresses and reach out to them. There are other really good groups out there, Pew Research Center, YouGov, that Ipsos is another firm that use online panels that they create by first they recruit people to be on the panel by using a random sample. They either call them or they send mail to their address and say, would you be part of this? And then they recruit these extremely large panels that are representative of the public and do a lot of their polling online. The difference between online polling and telephone polling is there are different things that you can ask in different ways. In online polling, you can actually show images and so forth, but you don't always get the nuances that you can, or immediacy or people, kind of being forced into making a choice as you do with telephone. So there's pros and cons on both sides. But those are the good ones. There are a lot of bad. The problem is it's so easy to do online polls now that there are so many bad ones out there that don't do all the rigorous stuff. Because you can just do them on the cheap, buy one of those Amazon Turk samples that provided by Amazon, which are just people who are paid to just simply go through and check off surveys. So a lot of that data you have to worry about, and unfortunately, there's more and more of it out there. So we don't know what to trust. The final part of doing a good poll is how you ask the questions.
Right.
And one of the things that I really focused on from the early days, because while I was a political science graduate student, my interest was really in psychology, sociology, like how people think, what makes people tick. And so I take that approach when I look at how people ask questions. So one of the things that you do is you don't ask questions the way the pundits think about them or the way that academics think about them. You ask questions the way that people on the street think about them.
Right.
And the best way to find that out is to listen to people on the street. One of the things I used to do a lot when I first started out, particularly when I was polling, starting here in New Jersey, was go to diners. That's where people talk about politics, right? And just kind of eavesdrop on what the conversations are. What are they thinking of? How are people talking about these things? What really is top of mind? But sometimes it's not like they approve or disapprove of something. There might be a third option somewhere in there that academics or the media doesn't think about because they always want something in black and white. And sometimes there's a nuance there that you only catch if you actually listen to how people talk about these things. So that's a good sign. That's what I always tell people when they look at polls and can you trust the poll? And particularly if it's about an issue. I said, well, in addition to knowing how the sample is drawn and all those other things, the first thing I need to know is how is the question asked? Because how the question asked can impact the way people answer the question. That's I think one of the key things there is that it's not only that you can bias a poll, and some people do that on purpose because you have these advocacy groups that go out and do polls and say, hey, people agree with us. And then you look and you say, oh, well, your position was presented with a lot of flowery language that makes it sound like it's the greatest thing on earth. And so, people are going to agree with it.
So one last question about the process, and you don't have to get into a lot of detail, is how do you go about selecting a truly random sample?
Well, there's a number of different ways to do that. Now, I mentioned the panel providers, like the ones that do the online, they do something where after they have recruited their sample, then they know what the population is supposed to look like according to a number of different demographic characteristics, and they make sure they get responses from the right proportions of that. When we are doing a telephone poll, which is a telephone poll of all people, the question is, where do you get your information from? So are you getting it from a list, or do you have to do something which we call random digit dialing? Random digit dialing is just simply we put every potential phone number that could exist in a particular area, whether it's the entire United States, whether it's New Jersey, whether it's Middlesex County, you name it. And then we put those numbers into a computer and they randomly generate the last digits because we don't know those digits. And then we call them. And that generates the known probability that everybody who has access to a telephone in that area will have the opportunity to be called. And therefore that becomes a random sample because of that. When we're doing an election poll, we actually work off the voter lists. So we take the voter list, and the voter list, about approximately 78% of voters we can match to a working phone number.
Wow.
So we actually do that. So we use that to create the random sample, because on the voter list, there's a lot of things that you know about the voter ahead of time.
Right.
You know their age. You generally know their gender, and in some cases, states that used to have to report race, you have that as well. You also have, really important, how often they voted.
Yep. Yep.
So you know which elections they voted in. So you know if you're talking to somebody who votes in every single election versus somebody who rarely shows up to vote. And so that can help you draw a better sample.
Right. Right. So that whole, I find all of that fascinating. And actually, it's amazing, like you pointed out in the beginning, that 800 people or however many it is can actually get you pretty close to what the entire country is thinking.
Right.
So let's get into a few national polling issues. How is President Biden polling overall right now?
Yeah, his job approval rating is now hovering just at 50% or slightly below 50% in some polls. It's come down over the past few months. I think what's happened is, he came into office, and I think the reaction that we initially got with his job approval rating being, solidly in the mid 50s, was that, okay, everything's working. The government's working. Things are, clicking. People are doing their job. It's competent. I think what happened with the spread of the Delta variant is we got, and this is what we're seeing in our polling, is we got mixed messages. People feel that they got mixed messages from the federal government about whether things were getting better or not, particularly when they reversed their stance on masks, for example.
Yeah.
And so that started, I think, to erode this sense, oh, well, maybe he doesn't have everything under control. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens as we go forward. I think, we have the situation in Afghanistan that's changing day by day. And while people don't necessarily change their opinion based on foreign policy, if it feeds into this narrative that maybe the Biden administration is not as competent as they portrayed themselves in the early days, that could have an impact on public opinion. And I think that's the key thing that we're seeing right now, is that people wanted kind of some normal presidency, and he was getting credit for that. But now, some things are not going according to plan. Some things are getting confused. People feel that they're not getting consistent messages or a consistent pattern of behavior. And that's when you start to lose public trust.
Right. Right. And an approval rating of like 55, 56% is good, right? I mean,
Yeah. Nowadays, approval rating in almost any circumstance, an approval rating of about 55% is a pretty good approval rating. Nowadays, with the partisan divide that we live in, 55% is a stellar approval rating.
right. Interesting. So he may not be doing great, but he's not doing horrible. So the 2016 presidential polls were by and large off the mark. Although I've been told that in 2016, President Trump called you the best pollster in America. And
yeah, I don't remember that, but
just
he did.
so
He had some kind words early in the campaign. I was one of the first pollsters. I might even be the first pollster, although I think maybe somebody else beat me to it, to actually start treating him seriously as a candidate and including him in our polls back in 2015. I think it was one of the first to do that. I thought, because usually some of us, we try to shy away from somebody who's trying to use talking about running for president as a way to kind of boost their image, or even running for president to boost their image, like Kanye West, for example. Some people forget that he was actually on the ballot in 2020 in some states. But it looked like this time around, or that time around back in 2015, that Donald Trump was finally serious about at least injecting himself. And my sense was that there was going to be some appetite for that in the Republican Party. I'm not sure what it was, but you could see that, in polls that we've been doing before, that there was a portion of the Republican electorate that was looking just to shake things up. And so we started polling him. And I think, that, and talking about how before he ran for president, Republicans actually didn't like him. The moment he announced, there was a sea change, something that I had never seen before.
Yeah.
Because usually, if a politician is extremely well known, they can't change what people think of them on spin on a dime there.
Right.
But Donald Trump was the first person that I ever saw to do that. And I remarked about how unusual that was. And I'd never seen something like it before. And I think that's what Donald Trump led to say, this guy's really good, right?
Well, yeah, I heard his opinion change when your polls
Yeah.
stopped
Yeah.
showing how great he was.
After saying that about me, then it had a poll that wasn't so good for him in Iowa, which he ended up losing to Ted Cruz, right? That wasn't as great for him in Iowa, and then he started saying, "Well, I've never even heard of this poll before."
So the coronavirus pandemic is, as you know, as you just pointed out before, it's become a highly politicized issue. I believe nationally, only about 60% of those eligible for vaccination have received at least one shot. So, have there been polls done that do we know why this large chunk of Americans? Okay, so tell us.
This is in fact, this is where polling has been incredibly successful, and this is what we do best. Everybody talks about the elections and this election, that you missed that election, this, and we can explain why we missed it or why we didn't miss it. Donald Trump. Look, there's no question that Donald Trump has changed the equation. Donald Trump brought out voters that don't come out in any other type of election. And that's why the polls were off in 2016. The polls were off in 2020, but they weren't off in 2017 and 2018, all those midterms, all those special elections. If Donald Trump's name is not on the ballot, there's a group of voters who just simply don't come out, and they don't talk to us. This is the key. If they don't talk to pollsters, Donald Trump has brought out voters who basically have tuned out of the system. They basically have said, I'm not going to participate in the system anymore. Except if there's this kind of charismatic leader that I can get behind, and Donald Trump is that guy. So they come out for him, and we miss them in the polling. I've looked at our polling, our 2020 polling. I've gone back over it, and there's no way, even if we could have accurately predicted every single person in our poll who actually voted and who they voted for, we still would have been off by a number of points, because there is a group out there. But that's the group that is kind of driving this kind of anti-vax movement. So this goes back to our question. So what we do is, the stuff that polling has done on vaccination and the reasons behind why people are not getting vaccination has been some of the best stuff that we've done. The problem is that folks at the CDC and federal health authorities aren't using this data to kind of understand how to do their messaging. And this is why they're screwing up, is that polling is out there saying, look, here's the problem. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to worry about in terms of who's going to get the vaccine and who's not. And this is how you need to craft your message in order to do that. And they're just bouncing all over the place. They're guessing at how people will react. Like, for example, one of the things that we knew in our polling was that when you lessen the mask mandate, which happened back in, or the mask requirements or recommendations, whatever they were, which happened back in May from the federal government, what that basically did is like kind of had a chain reaction here in New Jersey. The governor then felt pressure that he had to lessen them too, is that the people who were indiscriminately not wearing masks were people who were unvaccinated. Because now you can.
That's what I was afraid of.
And the polling actually indicated that was what would happen if you did that, because because they were so anti-mask and they were so anti kind of against any government requirements, that they would use that as an excuse to kind of blend in with the crowd.
Yep.
And so they wouldn't follow the rule, which was you should be masked if you're inside. But since most people were vaccinated, most people were not masked, you could hide amongst them. And we knew that's exactly what would happen, because the polling said it. Unfortunately, the folks at the CDC weren't paying attention to the social science. We keep hearing these things, follow the science. We're following the science. There's a lot of social science out there, the psychology and the sociology, which is what we're doing as pollsters, that says that there's other things that you need to consider when you're doing these public health messages. So we have two groups of people who are anti-vax. These are people who are hesitant and people who are outright opposed. The hesitant people are kind of a much more diverse group. They're kind of worried about the effects. They're worried that the vaccine, hasn't been tested enough. There's a whole host of things. They're just kind of reticent about vaccines in general.
Right.
or they don't have access to it, easy access to it. We see this in a lot of urban communities, a lot like communities with higher levels of poverty, lower social economic status, because they just don't. It's a lot of things about healthcare,
Right.
and you have to overcome. But then that's one group, and that group have slowly but surely have been chipping away at. The other group, though, are the group that may claim that they are worried about these things, but really, when you actually look at the underlying dynamics, it's about their political identity.
Huh.
Is that, I am a Trump Republican, and as a Trump Republican, vaccines are an infringement, masks are an infringement on my freedom.
Right.
And that's really what then they might say, oh, they haven't been tested, or these are the problems. But in reality, it's become this statement of political identity. It's just part and parcel of where we are in such a bizarre way in our country in terms of how people have always viewed policy through a partisan lens, but now they're viewing their own identity through a partisan lens.
Yeah.
This is who I am, ergo,
Right.
this is how I must act and behave. And there's no messages that you can get to them from public health officials that are going to do it.
Yeah.
It would take, kind of the leadership of the Republican Party en masse to consistently change their messaging for that to change.
Yeah, and I know, I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I read something where some of the Republican leaders in New Jersey were saying that since I believe it's Republicans are the least vaccinated group, that they needed to do something, at least here in New Jersey, about that, and do exactly what you said, tell them that it's all right.
Yeah,
Whether-
it's a problem because you get the messaging has been inconsistent. You have the governor of Florida, who's been very much anti and wants to stamp this down. The governor of Texas, similarly, not as vehement, but he got COVID, and that hasn't changed his opinion. The governor of Arkansas, on the other hand, though, is saying, it's if as this thing spread, you unvaccinated people are at fault, but that's kind of the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Because basically you need Trump to step out of his golf club in Bedminster and say, you know what, I got the vaccine. It's my vaccine. I invented the vaccine. Everybody should get the vaccine. And until that happens, you're not going to see a change.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's turn to New Jersey. We've got elections coming up. We've got the governor and all 120 seats that are up November 2nd. I'm sure the polling is heating up too. So how are the governor and Jack Ciattarelli polling?
Yeah, well, our Monmouth poll that just came out recently has the governor up by 16 points. That's pretty much par for the course. Democrats have a 17-point voter registration advantage here in New Jersey. So that's kind of where it's going. Over 60% of voters said they really don't have an opinion of Jack Ciattarelli, which is fairly normal for New Jersey. That's what I say to people: welcome to New Jersey elections, where a significant chunk of voters don't tune in until mid-October. Right. So, a lot of things that you can do right now aren't going to have much of an impact. So people are falling into what their normal political, preconditions are. So in New Jersey, that's a double-digit advantage for the Democrat. Now, of course, that could be different if people felt that Phil Murphy was not doing a good job. They would at this point, some people would start taking a closer look at the challenger and whether the challenger was an acceptable alternative. But that's the problem that Jack Ciattarelli has, is that we're still at a majority, over 50% of New Jerseyans who say Phil Murphy's doing a good job. And particularly doing a good job on the issue that they say is the top issue in the campaign, which is COVID, the pandemic. Property taxes still up there as a very big issue, but the thing is, it's not that as important. People don't feel that their property taxes are the highest in the nation, certainly, but they haven't gotten out of control under Phil Murphy. They still want them to go down. They're still too high, but Phil Murphy hasn't made them that much worse. And that's where Jack Ciattarelli has, the problem is that he can't beat Phil Murphy on the pandemic unless Phil Murphy makes a big mistake on the pandemic. And right now he can't beat them on taxes because people are more concerned about the pandemic than taxes, and taxes haven't been all that bad. If taxes were the only issue, you might have an entryway for Jack Ciattarelli to start getting, building discontent among voters. And certainly before the pandemic, if you looked at the governor's approval ratings, which were kind of middling back then, that might have been an opportunity to do that, to kind of get people to focus on an issue where you think you could win, but that's not happening. And the other thing is, there are very few swing voters out there nowadays. So it's not like, Jack Ciattarelli can go out there and swing those the working class voters in Middlesex County, who people like Chris Christie won in 2009 to oust John Corzine. Those voters have become hardcore Democrats in the Trump era. Wow. Even the Republicans that Jack Ciattarelli comes from in Somerset County have become Democrats in the Trump era. So Jack Ciattarelli can't even count on his home base, which is something that Republicans would have done in the past, to do that right now. So a lot. And Jack Ciattarelli, there's still, obviously, we're still a long way off from November, so there's still opportunities for Jack Ciattarelli there. But the problem is he can't create those opportunities himself. Either Governor Murphy has to make a big mistake, or basically kind of fate has to intervene and change the entire context of this election. And then Jack Ciattarelli has to be able to take advantage of that. But Jack Ciattarelli can't create those opportunities to happen.
Right. Given the surge in the coronavirus Delta variant, have there been any polls showing how New Jerseyans would react to another shutdown should that become necessary? And would that affect Murphy's chances of being reelected?
Well, it's a question about how much of a shutdown we're talking about, or what kind of requirements, are put in place. I think a complete shutdown would be problematic, but a return to masking requirements indoors, and more social distancing, maybe cutting back on the size of crowds that are allowed to gather. Almost all Democrats would support that, which means a majority of New Jerseyans would support that, right? Because that's how it goes. And that's one of the things that we've been seeing in our polling that's really interesting, is that the governor, federal health officials, all those, they get good marks for how they've handled the pandemic. But when we kind of ask and probe, they kind of question the wisdom of letting down our guard as we did back in the spring, as things started getting better. So there are a lot of Democrats out there who are ready and willing to say, at the very least, bring back mask mandates. And so if they did that, you'd hear a very vocal minority who's saying, you're infringing on our freedom. And of course, the media would report that because they're very loud. What the media doesn't report is what you can only see in polling, is that they're in the minority. I mean, that's just those are just the facts.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, since the media has to have readers, that, they do tend to, they need to have a conflict and a narrative all the time. So,
exactly.
You don't get, you miss a lot. All right. One last question. Democrats in New Jersey currently control the legislature. I believe it's 25-15 in the Senate and 52-28 in the Assembly. Do polls show them maintaining those majorities?
No, we don't have any polling on the legislature. Okay. But to be honest with you, you don't need to do any polling to know. And here's why, is because we have self-sorted over the past couple of decades. And what that means is people have moved around within the state in ways in which it solidifies one party or the other in those areas. So, and it's worked this way, is that people have sought out places where they feel that there are going to be people that they can identify with them. And since political partisanship has become such an important part of our identity, that whether they admit it or not, tacitly, when you go searching for a neighborhood, you're kind of looking for people that you think are like you. And what we've seen is that if you look at the voting histories, municipality by municipality, you will see different municipalities becoming significantly more partisan. We have fewer and fewer municipalities that are, kind of split down the middle than we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Wow.
What that means, to your question, is it's very unlikely that any incumbent party is going to lose in
Yeah.
the vast majority of these races. And maybe there's a couple where we still have some close races, but that means you're not seeing any significant change to the majorities that the Democrats enjoy in the legislature.
Yeah, our legislative elections are very boring. So listen, I want to thank you for joining us today. I am really glad that I got the chance to talk to you today. I have been wondering for years how polling is done, and now I have a much better idea. So thank you very much. And, we look forward to having you on again. I could talk to you for hours.
Sure. My pleasure, Jeff. Anytime.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about the Monmouth University Polling Institute, visit monmouth.edu/polling-institute. On Twitter, follow the Polling Institute at Monmouth Poll and Patrick at Pollster Patrick. One last thing, I urge all NJCPA members to contribute to the New Jersey CPA Political Action Committee. To be frank, the contributions of CPAs lag far behind other professionals and groups, leaving our PAC severely outgunned. Based on the number of NJCPA members, the average contribution per member is only $4. Other professions put us to shame. The realtors average $30 per member, the dentists average $52 per member, and the trial lawyers average $175 per member. We need your help to support candidates who demonstrate a commitment to the accounting profession. So please consider making a contribution today by going to njcpa.org/PAC. That's njcpa.org/PAC.